Funding for what I do is provided in part by my generous supporters on Patreon, and by direct donations from viewers like you. Thank you!
Why slopes are shockingly difficult in video game development. Let's go.
I'm getting rid of every slope in my indie game. And honestly, if you're a game dev, you should probably do the same thing.
No, I don't think
And
so.
I'll explain why. But first, a little context. I'm Kenneth, and I'm working on a 2D pixel art action platformer called Isidore's Edge. Hopefully you're seeing some sick-ass B-roll of the game right now.
This game honestly looks lovely. Like, seriously, look at this. This is beautiful. I should try to... It looks kind of like hand painting it and then limiting the palette is what it looks like. I should try doing that. I might actually be able to make some backgrounds. Like, the background is very low contrast. And, helps make the foreground stand out from it better. Even though it's, like, it's brown, but, like, this is, like, more saturated and sharp brown. While this is, like, much more flat looking. So, I'm liking the art design of this game so far. The art direction is pretty good. Yeah, the world is going to feel less. So I'm pretty sure we're going to end up disagreeing with this guy. But let's let him cook. So here we go.
It's a game sort of like Symphony of the Night and Hollow Knight and Mega Man X Knight. That sort of gameplay style. Based on the title, thumbnail, and intro of this video, you probably wouldn't have guessed it, but I love slopes. In video games, I love slopes. And I don't even really know why. I mean, look at this. Look at that subtle change in elevation.
That's a good slope.
The tasteful gradation of it. Oh my god, it even has perspective. But honestly, I don't really know why I love slopes so much. They just like tickle.
Oh,
look at
this again. Like, the bright line along here, because like he's doing perspective with it, right? This bright line tells me that this is exactly where I can collide with it. And he mentioned Mega Man X earlier, and I'm thinking like Mega Man X 4 through 6 has a similar perspective, but they go really wide with it and really gradual with how the color like shifts through it. So it's harder to read where exactly you can collide with tiles in Mega Man X 4 through 6. This striking line going through it, I love this. It just looks so good. It's so clear. It's perfect.
That subtle change in elevation. The tasteful gradation of it. Oh my god, it even has perspective. But honestly, I don't really know why I love slopes so much. They just like tickle something in my brain. Something in my brain goes, hell yeah, when I'm on a slope. Maybe it's the fact that it like makes the gameplay more smooth since you can change your elevation without needing to jump. It might just be nostalgia because the first time I played Mega Man X and I could like dash up a slope, it felt sick as hell compared to the previous Mega Man games. So maybe it's just pure nostalgia that makes my brain tickle with the good dopamine when I am on a slope. I really love slopes. And honestly, it was that love for slopes that kept them in my game for so long and made it really hard for me to let go of them. But at this point, the issues with having slopes in the game have far outweighed the benefits of having slopes in the game.
Really?
And so I'm going to break down the 3 major issues with slopes so that you can decide for yourself if you think slopes are worth it. And those 3 issues are 1, physics, 2, art, and 3, level design. So first, let's start with physics. Now, I could summarize this whole section.
I want to say that I know from experience, physics with slopes, like going up a slope, no problem. You just detect, oh, is the path ahead obstructed? Okay, but is it above obstructed? Okay, then just go forward and then move up. Going down, some of y'all remember how freaking hard it was for me to get going down to work. I just, like, getting the character to figure out when they're supposed to snap to the slope and when they're not supposed to. Oh, that was such a pain. Y'all remember how, in previous nightlies, like, jumping and then, like, right as you're about to land, you just suddenly snap down? I hated that. So, yeah. Already I can say I'm at least in partial agreement that slope physics are a pain.
by saying that game engines hate slopes. They just despise slopes. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but honestly, it's not that far off. It honestly just adds a lot of complexity to the physics engine. First, let's start really basic. The game has gravity, right? It just pulls the player towards the floor. This makes perfect sense when you're standing on a flat floor. You just get pulled into the flat floor. But once you're on a slope, obviously, issues start to arise. You can see Isadora is getting pulled down the slope.
Wait, hang on. Is this guy using canned physics? Is he using like Box 2D or something? Of course you're gonna have... Dude, you should not be using canned physics. Never use canned physics for a platformer unless you're doing like literally physics-focused platformer like Getting Over It or something. Cause like this is something that we've had down to a science since all the way back in the Atari. We've known how to make you like just stick to a floor without sliding down. I gotta explain? Alright, what do I need to explain? Because like Box 2D, okay, is a physics simulation library. If you try to make a platformer out of it, then yeah, you're gonna slide down the hill like he's doing here. Canned physics, as in like using a pre-made physics engine like Box 2D or Chipmunk or something. A lot of game engines like Unity and Godot, they come with built-in physics engines. See, canned is just short for like off-the-shelf, pre-made. Yeah, Godot. So he's using the canned physics. Yeah. And that's what's causing the problem here. You have to write physics from scratch if you want to do a 2D platformer. You can't have the game engine do that for you. Yeah, exactly.
You can't just stand on it. Now, this is actually not that big of a deal. Most modern game engines have some kind of support for it, and I'm using Godot for my game, so I can go in and turn on the features that snap the player to the floor, so that when you're standing on the floor, and it can detect a slope as the floor, once you're standing on the floor, you will not get pulled down. And so I can turn that on, and Isadora is stuck to the floor no problem. However, now that she's stuck to the floor, she can't jump because the game engine is pulling her onto the floor. So that's okay. We can also fix that where if you try to enter the jump state, you turn off the snapping to the slope.
I just realized my headphones are a bit too loud. It's echoing through. Sorry about that.
This does have a little bit of weirdness where you slide down a little bit more than you should when you transition from an aerial state into the grounded state on the slope, but that's fine. We can account for all of that. But then we have another issue. Player has a horizontal move speed. When you're moving on a flat floor, the horizontal move speed is very consistent. That's how fast you're going. When you're going down a slope, you're also being pulled down by gravity, so you're moving faster. Similarly, you're moving slower when you go up. This is not good. But we could also account for this,
terrible,
where we can measure the normal vector of the slope.
I feel like you could make use of that. Like, again, I think this is an issue of using pre-made physics. Instead of, just checking ahead and then bumping the character up. But is slowing down when going uphill and speeding up when going downhill really such a bad thing? I feel like you could work with that and make it like part of the challenge. Like, say something's chasing you, and you start going uphill, then it's going to be able to catch up with you. Yeah, it makes sense. Like, and from looking at like how it was moving,
speed. When you're moving on a flat floor, the horizontal move speed is very consistent. That's how fast you're going. When you're going down a slope, you're also being pulled down by gravity, so you're moving faster. Similarly, you're moving slower when you go up. This is not good. But we could also account for this, where we can measure the normal vector of the slope and determine the angle that the slope is at. And then if you're moving up a slope, we can apply a boost that is equivalent to the offset from the angle of the slope. So we can account for that too. But now we have an issue with the enemies, where the enemies have all these same issues. But that's fine. We can apply all these same fixes. Enemies, they snap to floor so they can move up the slopes. If they're trying to go aerial, then we turn off the snapping. So
oh, thank you for the subscription, Flutter.
that they can actually jump. We can apply that same offset so that they don't move faster down slopes and slower up slopes. All of that's working fine. But now they'll walk to the top of a slope but not walk down it. That's weird. What's going on?
Okay, that is weird. Again, I feel like this would be so much easier if either using like the predictive method that I mentioned earlier, where you check ahead and like if it's solid, then check up and down if those are free, or you could use an escape vector method where you just move the character and then depending on the angle of the slope, you move them up and down, or you move them left and right. So if it's like a really steep slope, then they'll slide down it. But if it's like this grade, or maybe like a 45 degree, like up to 45 degree, it'll move vertically instead so that you don't slide down it. It'll just push you up so that you're standing right on it, you know? Again, I think this is because the thing is trying to do an actual physics simulation.
With that, the raycasts that are trying to detect ground collision to see if there's still ground for them to walk on or if it's a ledge and they need to turn around, those aren't long enough to actually touch the slope if the slope is steep enough. So some slopes, they'll get to it, they'll see what they think is a hole in the ground, they won't walk down the slope. So
well, yeah, that's just just make a longer raycast. There you go.
We can account for this by either extending the raycast for the ground collision, but that could potentially see a tile that they would walk off a ledge onto another tile. So instead, we have a secondary raycast that we can use to check, is there a slope there?
Well, hang on, what's wrong with that, though? I mean, if it's like a short drop, what's wrong with letting them go up and down stairs, right? You don't have to go very far with this, because if you go like an incomplete tile down, it would, if it's a slope, if the slope is really steep, the character will avoid it. If it's not steep, then they'll go up and down it, you know? It kind of seems like a self-solving issue. Just make the raycast a bit longer, but not too much longer. So, like, just a few pixels. And if you really don't want it going, like, up and down like a half step, then go just a bit shorter than what a half step would be. And then they won't drop down it.
Because if we don't see any ground, we see a slope, we know that we can continue walking. So that's good. But now, the enemies are walking up to the bottom of a slope, but won't walk up it. So what's going on with that? We have a raycast that shoots out in front of the enemy to see if they see a wall. And if they see a wall, they turn around. The problem is that the slope, if the slope is steep enough, they will see it, and they will see that there is collision in the way and turn around. Okay, we can account for this too. When we shoot...
For that, you just move the raycast up a few pixels. Like, okay, here. Let me illustrate this real quick. All right. OBS, you wanna switch for me, please? Thank you. Hydrate, okay, will do. All right. So the way it sounds is he's going like this. He's got the dude, right? And doing the raycast checks like this for if there's ground, which you actually really want to go a bit in like this so that they can hang over just a bit before they turn around instead of, you know, pixel perfect on the edge. And here with the slope issue, he's checking like that, checking from the foot directly. What you want to do is just check a bit higher. So if you look at how like Sonic does it, it has the raycast that it does in this, and it's got 3 vertical, 2 horizontal. And so what it ends up being is sort of like a bounding box like this. But this singular bounding box is just way too strict. You want to have a narrower box for floor and ceiling collisions, and then have a shorter but wider one for wall collisions. And the interesting thing about doing it this way is when you hit a slope, it'll have a bit of leeway here for the slope to hit you. So I did a very bad stance here. Let me just... So, like, his character's got a pretty wide stance, right? So... Yeah, because if you've got the box like this, as soon as you hit a slope, you're just going to be hanging off the corner like this, and you're only going to have 1 foot on the hill. But if you've got the narrower one... Oh, hey, Tiki! Welcome to the raid! Welcome to the raid. Thank you for the raid. Welcome to the show. We're talking game dev here. How's it going? But yeah, like as I'm saying, and then you have a different hitbox here so that when you're on the slope, now you're going to be more centered on the slope. So using 2 hitboxes, yeah, doubles how many collision checks you've got for the environment, but the environment, you only need to check a very small area. You don't need to check any tiles over here, down here. You only need to check what's immediately around the player. So 2 hitboxes for the environment isn't going to have like a major performance hit.
Out that raycast to see if there's a wall, we get the normal vector of whatever we collide with and check and make sure that it's 90 degrees or it's like close to it, some offset, some value that determines what gradation of slope we're okay with walking up. We check that normal value, make sure it's acceptable. If it is acceptable, it's a slope and we can walk
normal
up.
Values are not this complex.
You see the problem? These engines and these features and all this stuff is made so...
So a normal value is basically you got a slope and it's facing out this way. If you check against it, the math that you're going to get is any angle that's pointing away from this arrow is going to end up with a value of -1, and anything pointing towards it is going to be closer to +1. So if you get a positive result when doing the dot product of these 2 vectors, and you get a positive, you know that you've got a normal that you can pass, that you can press against and be pushed back against. So normal math really isn't that complicated either.
Much more complicated by using
immediately
slopes.
He says much more complicated.
If it was all flat ground and flat walls, everything would be very simple, everything would work, no problem. But the slopes introduce so many other issues that you have to solve, where it's just physics problem after physics problem after physics problem. And the more problems you solve, the more pop up. It's like, I thought I had the enemy physics working with slopes perfectly, and then Rungtunk, do this.
But again, this is because he's using pre-made physics, which has already solved all these problems, but for a very specific use case. So now he's having to re-implement these fixes on top of what's already there, and that's causing him way more headache than he really should be dealing with, and way more than he would be dealing with if he just wrote something far simpler from scratch. I don't want to say skill issue, but this sounds like a skill issue.
Thanks, bud. And that's just the player and the enemies. That's not even considering the projectile physics and how they interact with slopes. It's nonstop, the amount of physics issues that pop up when you're using slopes. So if you don't use slopes, you don't have to deal with any of that. And I think that alone...
So, about the argument of if you don't use slopes, you don't have to deal with any of that, right? Moving back to art. I just realized, because OBS doesn't recognize Krita for some reason, did I just do that whole normal math talk while all you guys saw was the video? You guys didn't see me, like... Did you guys see me drawing the vectors like this? Heckin' hiff. OBS, I swear. No, I mean like earlier I was drawing. Okay. Okay. I don't understand why OBS doesn't detect Krita. It's kind of annoying. What were we talking about?
And that's just the player and the enemies. That's not even considering the projectile physics and how they interact with slopes. It's nonstop, the amount of physics issues that pop up when you...
All right, complexity. That's what we were talking about. All right. Can you hiffing? Okay. So complexity is like this, right? Let's say you've got a feature, and then you want to add another feature, right? So now you got to do how these two interact. Now you got to do how they interact with with themselves too under normal circumstances. So it's sort of like if you ever seen a round robin, that's sort of what we're doing here. So this feature is going to interact this. All right, so they don't actually have to interact with themselves, so that's why we get to cross it out. So scratch what I said there. Literally scratch it. But then you add another feature. And now this feature needs to interact with this feature. And this feature needs to interact with this feature. Again, they don't need to interact with themselves. So you get A, B, C interacts with A, B, C. Right? Every feature you add is going to multiply the complexity of your project. That's just natural. So what he's saying about slopes here basically applies to everything. Do I want to have animated graphics? Okay, well now I've got to add in like how do these animations affect gameplay? How do they affect readability? How much more work am I going to have to add now that I have a character who has an animation for every different state they're in? Like, a good example of this is my Tux sprites. Every form that I add to Tux, I then also have to add a different animation for each element, literally multiplying the work that I do for those sprites. That's just a choice you have to make.
Using slopes. So if you don't use slopes, you don't have to deal with any of that. And I think that alone is enough for most game devs to be like, not worth it. I don't want to put all that extra time into handling slopes, especially when you're doing something by yourself. If you're solo deving a project, there are so many things you need to deal with and so much stuff that you have to do that spending that extra time making slope physics work doesn't feel like the best use of your resources, if you know what I'm saying.
Honestly, that depends on the type of your game. Like, even for a Metroidvania, slopes can be very useful. They make the environment look way more natural and lively. You can make different enemy types that take advantage of slopes, such as rolling ones that maybe go faster when they go down a slope. This guy, to quote Minos Prime from Ultra Kill, is weak. I don't think he's weak. I think he's advocating is what it is. He's presenting the other side of the argument with the strongest case he can. So he's trying to build a strong case against slopes. I just don't agree with it, so far. Aside from the one part of, like, moving down slopes can be a bit tricky. But otherwise, so far, I'm just not agreeing with it. I know for the game I'm developing, slopes would be an option. Yeah, because, think about it, with STA, the core design of the game involves slopes. The main character uses slopes for his mobility, for a good portion of his attacks. Slopes are essential. And imagine Sonic without slopes. I mean, yeah, Sonic has incredibly complex physics. That's such a headache. But indie devs make Sonic clones all the time. There's a bunch of them out there. There's people out there making 3D Sonic. Look at SRB2. SRB2 has slopes. Playing a platform without slopes now. Yeah, you basically have classic Mega Man. Take both level design, both mechanically and aesthetically, between Mario 1 and Mario 3. Slopes are a literal game changer between them. Slopes add so much. Sonic Labyrinth, and we all know how that ended up. Sonic Labyrinth? I know that one was an overhead. Did that not have slopes? I could have sworn it had, really basic ones, but I might just be remembering wrong. I haven't touched Sonic Labyrinth in forever. Slopeless world, yeah. That's aware.
But that alone wouldn't be enough to stop me. I mean, I already solved most of the physics issues that have popped up, and I would be willing to continue solving all the physics issues that pop up just so I can have my beautiful, delicious little baby slopes in the game. But there's more issues. So let's get on to number 2, art. Now, let's do a little...
Okay, so he mentioned Mega Man X1 earlier. Imagine trying to do a minecart level, like in Armored Armadillo, where you're riding on the minecarts. Can you imagine what riding on, any sort of vehicle really, without slopes? Okay, it's complicated to get it working at first, but once you've got it working, you can duplicate that system across everything that interacts with it. It's a problem you only have to solve once, and then you just copy it to everything else. Editing Kelvin here. I wanted to add to the Armored Armadillo part, the part at the beginning where you're going downhill on a slope. There are these bats that are coming at you, and you have to shoot at them when you line up with them properly. Something like that would not work in the flat section unless you had the ability to aim in that game, which is not something that is included. Something I personally think should be included. I think X1 could have worked with aiming. But for a game where you can only move up and where you can only aim left and right, being able to move up and down lets you hit things in a different way. So having a method of just steadily moving down at a consistent rate, like going down a slope. But it would feel very differently from using a ladder, because on a ladder, you're holding down the whole time. It's a U input, It's not like the environment carrying you around. There's also a very different feel to it. It feels a lot more hectic when you're riding on a minecart going really fast versus the same vertical acceleration you'd get from a ladder. So it's a very different feel, and I think that's significant. So I just wanted to add that.
Little demonstration. Take a look at Isadora standing on some flat ground. Nice, right? Beautiful, perfect. No issues, looks great. I love the idle animation, awesome. Now, let's look at Isadora standing on a slope. I think the issue is fairly obvious.
I think I explained this issue earlier. Like, again, you got your character. Why do I keep making the legs so small? She's got a wide stance. Alright? You're going to be on the corner like this if you've got your hitbox taking up the whole character. But again, if you've got narrow floor and ceiling and wide wall sensors, you'll be a bit more centered. Now again, she's just got an absurdly wide stance. There's nothing you can do short of rotating her that's gonna fix that. Imagine Minecraft with slopes, though. I mean, Minecraft sort of has slopes. It's got the minecarts. The rails will make a slope automatically when you connect them between elevations. So Minecraft does have slopes. Could you imagine if Minecraft didn't put slopes in from minecarts? Yeah, or the bean shape, or even do like a diamond. Why did I make this corner up here? I started making a diamond and just, yeah, like that. So that when you're on a slope, you're centered. Perfectly centered. So if you do like a hexagon like that, cornered diamond, it'd be hilarious to imagine rails with no slopes. Yeah, could you imagine having to build rails that must always be on the same elevation? No one would ever use minecarts. They would be an absolutely abandoned feature. The entire community would hate them. They'd be railing against them.
Isadora, BB, what that foot doing? Your instinct when seeing that might be, oh, you need some kind of special animation for when she's idle.
My instinct is, it's a video game. I don't care about little details like that as long as I know where my character's hitbox is clearly enough. And again, using the hexagon would center her much better. My instinct is not, oh, that looks weird with her foot hanging off the edge, because if you're standing on a ledge, your foot's going to be over. Games have gotten away with doing this for so many years. Literally no one, except for this guy who's, again, trying to advocate against slopes, has to bring this up. But who else would actually think about it? Who here has ever said, oh, this game is ruined, it's artistically bankrupt because the character's foot floats over the edge? No one cares about that. I think this is the worst point he's made so far. Like, if the physics thing was a skill issue, this is literally no issue. No one cares.
On a slope. This one has her legs spread out very far, which makes sense for flat ground. You know, you got to keep that battle stance. But when you're on a slope, she should maybe have her feet pushed closer together so you don't have that issue. What about her standing attacks, right? When she's not running, should those have...
Like, literally only the AAA market, where they're obsessed with realism, would care about her foot floating over the ground like this. No one else cares, especially in indie games. Indie games are purely about gameplay or artistic expression. They don't care about inverse kinematics or something, unless it's like I Am Bread, where every little bit of possible collision is part of the game, is a feature. In 3D, it looks weird. I get that. But it's never, it doesn't present any sort of mechanical problem. Like, it looks weird, at worst. BK, go grab a Snickers. Go grab a Snickers, BK. You're hungry.
A special sloped version, not to mention running up and down the slope, also looks a little off. It's not as bad. Like, you can buy it, but you could have a better animation for running up a slope where she gets like a little bit more vertical move.
If you want to account for it while running up slopes, again, just rotate the character. If you rotate the character, that solves the whole thing.
On the knees. So are we just going to have an entire separate suite of animations to use when we're on the slope, and then we have to be very careful when we're playing the animations to make sure we're blending between them correctly?
Some games actually do that though, like Castlevania. If you're on stairs, your character's stance and movement actually look different when you're on stairs than when you're on the floor. So yeah, this has been done before, but at the same time, this guy is completely forgetting that sprite rotation is a thing.
Is that the answer? Because, I mean, we could do that. It is more, expensive in terms of time and effort of making all those animations.
And you know what else you could do with sprite rotation? If you're on a slope and your character is rotated, that's naturally going to rotate the graphics for the sword too, right? When she's slashing. Have that move the hitbox, and now you've got uphill and downhill fighting in your game. You've just turned an artistic choice into a new game mechanic. Like, you know how having the high ground in a 2D game is typically not so great because a lot of the time your character just only attacks forward? But if you're going by the rotation of the sprite, now when you've got the high ground and you're literally fighting from above down at them, attacking in a whole new way, that turns into a really cool feature. And this guy's just ignoring that possibility.
And getting them all in and working. But it doesn't really solve the problem, because what about enemies? Let's do the worst example we have, Runktonk. Runktonk is an amazing enemy with a fantastic walk cycle. I mean, look at him moving.
Wait a second, that's just Mr. Tree from Super Tux. That guy just took Mr. Tree from Super Tux. Everyone's ripping off Super Tux.
On some flat ground, it's beautiful. But Runktonk is very, very wide, and being wider makes this problem more obvious, as you will soon see. So let's see Runktonk walking up a slope and walking down a slope. Let's watch Runktonk walk up this slope.
Alright, again. So again, this guy. If you do a hexagon, then he would be centered, right? So that the slope would then be here, and it would look better. And then, again, you could just rotate the guy. I'm just having so many issues today. Alright, so yeah. So now, when he's going up a slope, just rotate it. Ta-da! Do like that. Do like that.
And now we can watch Runktonk walk down the slope. He barely looks like he's even on the ground. It's hilarious. He's not even related to the ground. It looks like he just kind of floats up next to it. Now, there are some small tweaks we could do here to get it looking better, like changing his collision and changing the way the Z indices work up and maybe hiding. Like, there are some little tweaks we could do, but they don't solve the core issue. The core issue here is that there isn't any perspective to these tiles, so it doesn't look right. So the solution is to use perspective. Now, perspective is like a different type of tile set. Let's use some concrete examples so you can see what I mean. Hollow Knight is a game that does not have any perspective on the tiles. They are like full, flat, face on.
I honestly like, going back to my X4 example, I like tiles without perspective because it makes it much clearer about what you can and cannot collide with.
Seeing the tile and Hollow Knight.
Wait a second. He said earlier that his tiles do have perspective. When he was doing the whole sexy thing, he was talking about how the tiles do have perspective. And then just a moment ago, he said they don't have perspective. Pick a lane, dude.
Stands directly on top of the tile, like literally.
Especially after I just gloated about how good your tiles were. Come on.
Tippy top. Whereas if you look in Mega Man X4, this has perspective on the tiles.
We're not gloated, gushed. Okay, these tiles have a better, they got the line here in the middle that helps read it. But I think the issue that I was having was in the spider dudes, was Web Spider. Such a terrible name, Web Spider. But like, they were much more natural and craggy looking.
You're not seeing the top of the tile from front face where you only see like the very like tippy top line. You're actually seeing the top of the tile from a perspective view above it, so you see like more of it. It goes deeper in. Like, let's put Hollow Knight on like one side and Mega Man.
What other game did I have an issue with that? Frogado. Fragato has very unclear collision with the tiles because they're like super detailed, which, you know, any screenshot from that game looks gorgeous. Not gonna argue. To be fair, yes. Forgot just a mess of it. Oh god. It wasn't always a mess. It used to be good. After they redid it, and they decided everything needs to have a health bar, and they need to force the fire breath on you, and Fragato sprites look like they've been AI tweened. I don't like the modern design either. They got rid of his fingers. I don't like that. Like, okay, his swimming animation is smoother now. Bully for you. His sprites are such a mess. They're so noisy now compared to what they used to be. The new UI! Oh my god, don't get me on the new UI. I hate the new UI. The old one was so beautiful and perfectly functional. The new one looks like a mobile game. It's awful. Why would you use, like... God, I don't even want to get into it. Let's move on. We're moving on.
X4 on the other side, and you can see Hollow Knight stands on top of the tile, the very top line, and it's like a front-facing view, whereas in Mega Man X4, he's standing on the top of the tile, but like in the middle of the top of the tile, and you get to see like an extended view of it into the Z-index because of perspective. That's the key phrase to take away there, Z-index. The tiles move back into the Z-index, and you get to see that because of the perspective. Actually, now that I think about it, I saw a really helpful guide on Twitter. I'll go find that and make sure it's in post here, so check out this very useful guide.
Oh, yeah, I want to...
Actually, now that I think about it, I saw a really helpful guide on Twitter. I'll go find that and make sure it's in post here, so check out this.
Flat facades, surface. I'm a fan of the Deep Shadows version, where it's like the outer tiles have texture, but then in it, it's just a solid color that, you know, better indicates what shouldn't be, what collided with or visible. I mean, these aren't, like, for some objects, I don't mind this stuff. Thin walls, that's not a perspective. Fake perspective like this. I think this looks really ugly. I don't like this one. Jutting floor looks pretty nice. Surface layer looks pretty nice. Modular blocks. This is for like if you want to make like a Minecraft clone in 2D. Yeah, it looks awful. It looks so messy. And again, my issue with where are you able to stand? Like, is the collision here? Or is it here? Is it only the solid black stuff, or not black, brown, that you can collide with? I mean, I guess that would be readable, but it's still ugly as heck. Oh yeah, and top-down fake perspective is great. But then you got this. Like, look at the perspective one, right? From where she's standing, you would think that this is where the collision would be. And then as you come over here, you'd be partially hidden behind it. But then that brings up so many layering issues. Like, if you want to have a wall with like a hidden passage in it, you could only do it from this side, because this is the side that literally hides things. How would you do it over here? How would you indicate that? To be honest, I think that 2D platformers just work better without perspective.
Very useful guide. You can see the different ways that a tile set can be.
Why does this one just have some furniture in it? Again, how is thin walls a perspective? That's just a different area.
Viewed. Hollow Knight is one called Jutting Floor, whereas Mega Man X4 and what I would need to support the Z-indexing is something like perspective or fake perspective. The problem with perspective is that the extreme angles don't support wall climbing, because you could only climb the wall from one side of it. The other side, you would be hidden behind the wall. Now, you could still do that, but it would look funky. So I could use fake perspective, which solves that problem, but it introduces a new problem, which is that it looks freaking weird. Fake perspective
it does look freaking weird. Okay, we found something that I can agree on with this guy. Fake perspective looks freaking weird. You get 1 point, my man. 1 point.
What Mega Man X4 does, which is use a perspective view, but the angles are like directly straight into the Z-index, right? There is no perspective skew at all. It's just straight into the Z-index. And all of these are like possible. We could do this to solve the issue, but it is more complicated to do this rather than doing like the front facade or like the jutting floor versions of tile sets. It's harder, it's more work, and it limits what you can do artistically. I have had difficulties with using tile sets because of this z-index constraint that's introduced by slopes, and I've been talking to some environment artists that have said the same thing. I was like, we really need this z-index so that we can support slopes, and they said, do you really need the slopes? Because the z-index thing is hard. So essentially, wanting to support slopes requires you to have this deep z-index so that things look right, and that deep z-index introduces...
It's like, to be fair, for the Mega Man X perspective, where it's just the top, slopes, they will still add a bunch more tiles that you'd have to create for it, but at the same time, you could just take a regular top texture and just skew it to match whatever slope you want it on. So I don't think that's too big of a challenge.
There's a lot of constraints around the art of the game. If you have a particular look you're going for that doesn't include this perspective thing, just don't use slopes. It'll look weird unless you're willing to do a bunch of other animation work. It just increases the workload on the art side.
Again, though, you don't have to account for slopes in your art completely, in your character art. Like even Mega Man X4, which he was just showing, has slopes, has perspective. X does not rotate or change his footing at all when on a slope. And that's a professional game right there. It's because it's such a non-issue. I still think that the whole art section so far is a non-issue.
By quite a
Ironically, it being a non-issue, also it's the only one that includes a point that I agree with.
lot. By itself may be worth it if you really like slopes, but the increased workload from the art and animation side, plus the increased workload from the physics side, and suddenly, with the increased workload here, you're starting to see why it just doesn't make sense from a workflow perspective to want to use slopes. You save so much time and effort that you can dedicate to other, way more important things. But I gotta tell you, I was a holding fast. I was headstrong and moving forward with my slopes. I didn't care about any of this. I was like, yeah, we got slopes. Until I ran into problem number 3. And problem number 3 is level design. A quick interruption to let you know that Isadora's Edge is now live on Steam. So if you want to wishlist the game, the link will be in the description and the pinned top comment. So head on over there and give it a wishlist if you're feeling up to it. I'll make like a full announcement video and talk about the details of it later, but it just went live. So I decided to record this and get it in before the next video goes out. All right, back to the video. So I've been working on...
Yeah, level design. This is... Now I wish Frost was here. They'd love this part.
On the level design for the Corrupted Forest level in my game quite a bit recently. Maybe I'll show you some like test footage. I've been using like gray boxes. Well, I mean, I think yes, technically. So I've been working on the level design for the Corrupted Forest level in my game quite a bit.
Corrupted Forest. This guy is ripping off Super Tux. He's got a corrupted forest and walking trees. It's Super Tux with a sword. Yeah. Thief.
Recently. Maybe I'll show you some like test footage.
Yeah. That's some nice looking wall climbing. Doing it without jumping. That looked cool. Editing Kelvin here again. It just occurred to me while editing this that my previous idea about using 2 hitboxes, having one shorter, wider one for walls and having a tall, narrow one for floor and ceiling, would also help out in wall jumping sections because if you've got the shorter hitbox on either side, you'd have more leeway when it comes to those spiky sections there, and so you could like move closer to them without actually getting damaged by them. And I think that would be like really helpful to players and like help make it more balanced, and because it can be like very easy to accidentally touch those when it looks like you shouldn't be able to, so having just that little bit of extra affordance I think would be very helpful.
I've been using like gray boxes, well, I mean, I think yes, technically blue boxes, just to prototype gameplay without focusing on the art of it. And the issue I was running into is that slopes can really trivialize sections because it gets rid of ledge guarding. Now, if you've ever played Smash Brothers or you're familiar with that, then ledge guarding makes perfect sense to you. Don't even need any more explanation. But in case you don't, there's a ledge, right? And there's an enemy on the ledge. You have to jump to get up onto that ledge. You can't just like be there now. And that means the enemy on the ledge has a lot of power over you. You can't just like recklessly go up there. You have to engage from below. And being below the enemy, especially if they have projectiles or other ways to guard the ledge, puts you at a huge disadvantage. So it can add some challenge. It allows for some interesting game design. Slopes eliminate that.
Well, hang on. I know what you're going here because he's throwing stuff, right? And now you just don't have to jump. But you still have to dodge his attacks. And yeah, again, just don't use slopes in this one section. Like, have another section without the slope to make it harder, and now you've got escalating difficulty, which means more content for your level. Bro thinks slopes are mandatory when... Again, they're not mandatory everywhere. And here's another thing. He's missing an opportunity. Why does this character only have to throw? Why can't he be, when on a slope, like, roll an attack down? Or have another enemy, like I mentioned earlier, a rolling enemy that goes faster when going up and down, when going down a slope. What if that enemy was here, right? And you see it moving towards the slope, like it's like one of the hedgehogs that Super Tux has, crawling towards the slope, right? And you know if it gets to that slope, it's gonna zoom down fast and become a big issue. So you could either time a jump to avoid it, or you could try to rush up there and attack it before it gets to its dangerous state on the slope. This is an opportunity that he's presenting as a problem. This is totally not an issue. This is actually a good thing here. This is more potential for level design. Now I'm starting to think that this seems kind of uncharitable. Like, I don't want to attribute any sort of malice to this guy, but I think he's being uncharitable with this example because, again, you could just have this section without a slope. You could have a different enemy here. You could mix it, like maybe the slope just brings you up a bit, like just for some visual variety, say up to here, right? And then from here, you'd still have to jump. So you still got the challenge, and you've got some visual variety to it. There's so many ways to tackle this, and they just come to mind immediately, that I feel like he'd have to intentionally ignore them to make this point. I don't want to say that this guy's being purposefully disingenuous, but I think he's being very uncharitable with his interpretation of this scene. Because again, it's so easy to fix this. He literally had an example of what to do here. If you're using this enemy, don't use a slope. Problem solved.
It means you can just walk up to the enemy that is elevated above you. It means that an elevation change isn't inherently an advantage or a disadvantage.
Only for this one type of enemy, dude. Make a new type of enemy. Or heck, here's an idea. The enemy is like throwing stuff in an arc over you, right? What if it had less of an arc when it's above you? So now the slope means you've got less room to dodge, because the closer you get to it, the less time it takes for the projectile to reach your elevation. So even with the enemy he's got here, it can present a new challenge by including a slope. His own example is self-defeating.
Now, you could say, just don't add the slope there then, right? If you want the challenge of the enemy guarding the ledge, make it be a ledge, don't add a slope. Okay, so we've eliminated one use case of slopes, right? So what if we just want a change in gradation? We want to increase or decrease our elevation. We would be able to use a slope here because we don't care about there being a challenge, it's fine. Well, then you also don't need a slope. Just don't put a challenge there. Just
wait, hang on. Don't put a challenge there means you don't need the slope? What if you just want a slope for some visual variety? Again, what is his point here?
Make it a jump or whatever, and just don't have a slope. Then there's...
But having to jump all the time just makes the jumping feel less special. Again, variety is what keeps the game from getting boring. If it's always, every time you want to change elevation, you jump. Every time. Every single time. Not, oh, okay, here's a chance to go down. Do I want to fall and then resume walking at the same pace? Or do I want to slide down this slope and increase my speed so when I reach the bottom, I can take off running at extreme speed? Again, what Sonic does in every game. That's like, he's got wall climbing, right? Why include, yeah, yeah, he will. Like, why include wall climbing if ladders are a thing? Why not just put ladders there? Why go through all the trouble of programming wall climbing if you've got ladders? because wall climbing is cool and adds variety, and you can make up new challenges with wall climbing. Same logic applies to slopes. You just need to take advantage of them. This is an argument coming from someone who does not take advantage of slopes.
Still no challenge, and you're still changing your verticality, right? So we don't really have that use for it either. And this was the issue I kept running into.
Again, difference in kind. They both accomplish the same thing, but in different ways, and it keeps it feeling fresh. That's the reason, if you're going to be just for changing verticality, you have different ways of moving vertically because it keeps the game fresh. And also, like, if you've only got one way of going up and down, let's talk about speedrunning for a moment. Speedrunners love when there's a bunch of different ways to move, because that gives them options for routing and a higher skill ceiling. The more you simplify your game, the lower the skill ceiling, and the less interesting it is to replay, and thus the less interesting it is to run.
Over and over again. Anytime I tried to use a slope during level design, I was like, there is no point to having this here. Either it is invalidating challenges, or it isn't adding anything.
That's a you problem, dude!
It actually...
Why does he keep laughing at stuff that's not a joke? He's like, every time I tried to use a slope, it either invalidated a challenge or served no purpose. What was funny about that? He's doing all these quick cuts anyway. I think he should leave the laughs out. Maybe it's like a nervous chuckle. Maybe it's because he knows that he's having to really reach to make this case. And so he's like nervous laughing. It's like his liar tick. Because like he said at the beginning, he loves slopes. So if he loves slopes and he's making all these terrible arguments, I think he's got this liar tick going on because he doesn't believe his own statements.
Actually came to a head, most obviously, when I finally found a use case for a slope. I prototyped some traps in the level that have like a laser, and if you trip the laser, it shoots you. You know, it's a tripwire. I wasn't sure if it fit the forest, but I was just prototyping and playtesting mechanics, you know, as one does. It worked pretty well. Maybe I can throw the footage up here of me like playtesting with the slopes there. And I was like, okay. Aha! Perfect. I'm so glad I have slopes in this game because this one obstacle in this one room type is a little bit easier to make thanks to the slopes. And
I'm not sure what exactly the slopes added there, other than like, here's the funny thing is I can actually use his exact argument.
One obstacle in this one room type is a little bit easier to make thanks to the slopes. And that gave me a sort of realization that maybe, actually, I don't need the slopes. If it was this difficult to find a use case for them, there are plenty of other room types I could make. Essentially, the issue I have with slopes when it comes to level design, it's not a tool that's really helping me very much. It's not...
Wait, I could have sworn I went back. Why is it not? This video makes me not want to buy the game. I'm questioning the game design from this one video alone. Yeah, like, dude, if you're having this much trouble finding a use for slopes, like, what if you've got, like, a sliding attack? Like a slide kick. And it has longer range when you're on a slope. And again, it being a downward attack makes it very useful for taking advantage of the high ground. But if you try to use it while going uphill, because it's a slide, it's a lot shorter going uphill, not as useful. So then you have to think about where you're using the slide. There's so many ways of using slopes, and this guy's just not using them. Like, even Symphony of the Night made good use of slopes. Because you had, like, the downward slash, right? So again, high ground became an advantage there. But because it wasn't a jump, there was also the danger of enemies being able to walk up to you. This guy's just being very uncreative with slopes. And yeah, like, if he is being honest, if his laughter is not a liar tick, and he's honestly believing every word that he says about slopes, I question his ability to design levels if he's having this much trouble justifying slopes in his game. And he's already done the work of including them, and again, the tiles that he made already look great when they're sloped. Why would he want to remove them? Even if it's just for visual variety, slopes serve a purpose. Why would you want to... That's like saying, I don't want to make decorations for the forest, because if I make decorations for the forest, now I also have to make decorations for the city. So, like, if you're going to keep paring down all this stuff because now you got to do this one thing, now you got to do this other thing, you might as well just make an Atari game. Just make a game where you're just a square jumping on other squares. Square. Scroke. It's like if the caves in Super Tux didn't have crystals. Yeah. Oh yeah, doors especially. Like, are they the kind of doors that open and close on the spot and control their collisions so that they act as a wall when closed and a space when opened? Or is it a teleport door where you open it and it jumps you to another location? And if so, do you want to freeze the player while it's animating? Do you want to make them invincible during that freeze, or do they have to open it carefully when there's no enemies around? There's a lot to take into consideration there. The obvious solution, according to this guy's logic, is don't have doors.
Unlocking new cool design space for me to use. It's just something that's there, so I put slopes in. And sometimes I have to go delete them because it's invalidating a challenge. For the
Again, you're designing the wrong challenge here. You're not designing a challenge that's meant to take advantage of slopes. You're one enemy who always throws spores at the same height. Of course it's not designed for slopes. In fact, the way it throws, it looks like it'd be better suited if it was below the player. But even then, what if you've got it below and the slope is going down? So now you can't just drop down onto it. You got to walk down to it. Maybe it's in a narrow area where it's got a low ceiling, right? So you can't jump. You have to walk down to this thing. So you have to carefully proceed because it's throwing things up in an arc which are naturally aimed at you. That takes advantage of slopes. Your mushroom guy can take advantage of slopes. Yeah, this guy's just not thinking creatively. He's not making any sort of connections to what he can do with this stuff. It's like if someone told me that ladders were a bad design because they invalidate the challenge of going up and down. Okay, what if you're climbing a ladder, but there's some dangerous thing bouncing left and right, so you have to time your movements so you don't get hit? Or what if there's an enemy pestering you, so now you have to fight on a ladder? Like, just because it invalidates, quote-unquote invalidates one challenge, doesn't mean there's not a bunch of other challenges you can create with it. Hydrate. Yes, my voice is starting to hurt. I could really use a hydrate. Thank you. Holy hiff.
For the most part, slopes are in there purely aesthetically. They are not functionally serving any level design purpose. I'm deleting a lot of them to make...
Again, though, if they are purely aesthetic, what's the problem with that? Then it's a decoration. Are you going to delete all your levels' decorations because they serve no functional purpose? That's a terrible reason.
Make the level design harder. And, not to mention, you would think, right, intuitively, that having more options available makes level design easier, but I find a lot of the time that it's constraints that breed creativity.
Constraints do breed creativity, but it never hurts to have a few more tools. Especially when you're, like, making the tools yourself. Then you become intimately familiar with what they can do. Like, hey, the constraint of having only static arrays in C led to the creativity of creating vectors in C++. But now that we have those vectors, it's so much easier, but we can still use the old tools. We can still use static arrays. Like, just because a new tool exists and a new constraint we've been freed from, doesn't mean you can't choose to go back to that constraint. It doesn't mean you can't choose to have a level without slopes, to create just the challenges that work only with slope.
Like having some defined boundaries for your problem space to make it easier to come up with a solution to that problem. And so giving myself less tools for building the levels actually gives me more ideas because I have to creatively use the tools I do have. And slopes were not really assisting me at all.
Because you're not creatively using slopes. Oh my god, this is like someone who's working with a wrench for everything gets handed a hammer, and they're like, what do I do with the hammer? The hammer doesn't help me put bolts into my thing. It's like, okay, but what if you come across a nail? Have you considered using nails? Now you've got something that works with the hammer. If you don't have any nails to use your hammer on, try getting some nails. If you don't have any enemies that take advantage of slopes, try putting in enemies that take advantage of slopes. Make a new enemy to work with slopes. make a new ability that works with slopes. Like, good grief. I'm trying to stay positive, but I'm starting to get frustrated with this guy.
So ultimately I had to ask myself, are having slopes available to me while building these levels making things easier or harder? And the answer, shockingly to me, was harder.
This is entirely a you problem, dude. This is entirely a you problem. Physics, a one-time challenge that you made harder by using pre-made physics. Art, total non-issue. Level design, totally a you problem. The physics was hard because of a mistake you made. The art is not an issue, and the level design is hard because you lack the creativity to make use of the tools that you have. My game's freaking full of slopes. And you know what happens? If I make a level without enough slopes, people complain that there's not enough slopes. Because I've made such effective use of slopes in my game that it becomes awkward and uncomfortable when they're absent. The same with OG Super Tux. Now that we have sliding, having levels without slopes, not only does it just lack the visual smoothness that they bring, but they're less fun to play without them. Because why would you want to just go down and continue moving at the same speed when you have another option of movement that lets you then take advantage of the slope and get a thrill out of it? Because now you're moving faster, and that's fun. You have an opportunity to build up speed, and now you've also got the challenge of maintaining that speed, and the longer you can maintain it, the more fun it feels. Just being able to move faster for a while and keep the challenge of maintaining that speed in. That's what Sonic, at least classic Sonic, that's what classic Sonic is built on, my guy. And that's now a multi-million-dollar game franchise. You cannot tell me that you can't figure out an effective way of using slopes when this problem has been solved so many times before. Okay.
So they weren't helping me build levels like I thought they would. They were causing me to do a bunch of extra programming and development to handle all the physics issues. And they were making things take longer and be more difficult artistically. And for what benefit? So that you can go like this? Whee!
Oh my god. Okay, that has to be a purposefully uncharitable example. That has to be on purpose. So that you can go wee? My guy, again. Sonic is all about going on a slope to go wee. Even that example is so bad.
And
the way... I wonder... Okay. The laughing is getting annoying too. Does he think he's funny? Is he honestly trying to make a joke there?
Sure, I'm oversimplifying saying that's all you get from it is the ability to go wee up a slope. But honestly, that's more or less what it is.
Okay, here's the thing. You got the dash, right? And the dash lets you go up a slope faster. What if you could chain that dash up a slope with a jump to do a high jump? There's another mechanic, dude. I'm giving you free mechanics you can use. Take my ideas. Just take them. I don't even care if you don't credit me for it. I just want you to make a better game. Dash up a slope and chain it into a high jump. There you go. Free idea. Let's say you got something that's just out of reach, right? And then you get your dash ability. And now you can chain it with that. That would open up a whole new route or new secrets or something. My guy, you've got to... talking about constraints breeds creativity. But the counterexample of that is creativity comes from thinking out of the box. This guy's put himself into a box to the point where his terrain is made of boxes. If I play his game and find out that he really has eliminated all the slopes, that he was serious about all of this and genuinely removed all his slopes, I'm going to be so disappointed. I will, honest to GNU, think this guy is a failure if he really deleted all of his slopes just because he couldn't figure out a reason to use them. That he put in all the work of adding slopes and then deleted them, and then made this whole freaking video to justify his decision to remove slopes because he couldn't think of a use for slopes. I'm feeling, honest to GNU, sad about this. Yeah. Like, and the two sayings, constraints breed creativity, but creativity comes from searching out of the box. You can put those together. Here's what you do. You think out of the box. You take what you find outside the box, and then you go back into your box and think, could I fit this in here? Could this possibly enrich what I have in the box? Ranking this video -2 out of 10. Get him out of game dev for this one. If he's honestly serious about all this, then probably yeah. This is starting to remind me of that one guy who was a quote-unquote professional developer who couldn't figure out how to shoot the ceiling in a Metroid game. Yeah, this is starting to sound like he's dead serious. Yeah.
The one use case I can really think of is in Symphony of the Night, where there's like that big staircase, and there are enemies that have like a horizontal threat range.
Holy crap, dude, you're showing a genuine example on screen right now? Yes, what I've been saying the whole time. Make an enemy that takes advantage of the slope. Holy crap, my guy, you're looking at the answer right in front of your face. I think designing my game, the character my game, is hard, but I'm not going to give up because I'm out of ideas. Exactly. Like, even if you can't think of how to use something, look at other games and how they make use of it. Exactly what he's doing right here. How did Symphony of the Night make slopes work? Designing a challenge specifically for slopes? What an amazing idea. And yet, he's failed to internalize this perfectly valid idea. He has not made use of it. Exactly, Flutter. Like I said before, if you don't have the enemy, create it. This guy is being such a Jaffe right now.
And they're like above you vertically, and you get to like engage them. But I don't know why I couldn't just build that with ledges also.
Because variety, dude. Especially if the enemy's got like a projectile or something that air guards. And so taking the lower, sneakier route with walking up to it. Again, like, if you've got a character throwing projectiles, jumping could be a bad idea. Alright. Here's an example. You got your dude up here. Throws stuff. Right? You've got all this area where you're safe from projectiles. But if you've got a slope, now see how much less space there is between the enemy's projectiles and where you can walk? Like, you don't have this cover anymore because now you've got a slope leading right up to them. So his own example of ledge guarding is invalidated by the direction that his character's projectiles go. Like, come on, man. You've got to be kidding me with this.
Ultimately, the benefit of slopes is that you get to have slopes. And the cons are that...
What was funny about that? The benefit of slopes is you get to have slopes. The benefit of enemies is you get to have enemies. The benefit of coins is you get to have coins. What's the joke? Some of my characters are heavy. Some can easily do combos. Others are easy to eject. You need to think of attacks that reflect best either the character or what they represent. At this point, slopes are literally Legos for me. Yeah. And also, slopes are really good for making the environment look more natural. Or just make sense in general. Like, Castlevania, right? Why would you have an entire castle without staircases anywhere? Why would everything be a ledge that you have to jump to? That would make no sense. And what about, like, ledge grabbing, right? Like, MIDI can grab a ledge and hang from it. Maybe I can't think of any useful way to make it. But maybe I just wanted to program it so that I can embrace the challenge of having done it. Like, if you're making games for fun, Why would you not want to challenge yourself? Why would you not want to embrace everything that comes with it and experience that and learn from it and be able to say, I did it? Why would you not want that? Why would you want to take the easy way? That's such a AAA dev way to think. Like, oh, we got to reduce costs. We got to make it dumber in case players can't understand how to slope. This is such a I can't even think of a word for it. I mean, I'm just gonna say what it is. It's an L take is what it is. This whole video is an L take.
It's way more work, and that's it.
It's not way more work, and that's it. And his laugh is coming off as really obnoxious now. I'm gonna say this right now. It's just, for all your future videos, dude, edit out your laugh. You seem so obnoxious because you're laughing at yourself for saying things that aren't funny. Why are you laughing? It's just, ooh, it's really rubbing me the wrong way.
I was doing all this extra work to make sure slopes were functional and available and looked artistically correct.
Forced.
And I was needing to go out of my way to try to figure out ways that I could still incorporate them. And it's like, why am I doing all this extra work to give myself extra work when I can make fun levels without slopes? They are not necessary.
Hey, you know what? Why include jumping? Why include jumping? Why not just have a spring on the floor everywhere where you are expected to jump, so that the only buttons the player has to press are left and right? I mean, a spring is sort of like a slope. In that regard, you just move left and right and then it goes up and down for you. Why not just make it 1D? Why have any vertical movement at all? Because then you'd run out of things to do with it. And then you'd want more that you could work with. Every time you add a new mechanic, you multiply the amount of work you have to do, but what is the verb of exponent? You exponentialize. You exponentialize the possibilities of what you can do with that. Well, I mean, maybe V6 is a bad example because to my recollection, V6 has no slopes. But I haven't played that game in a long time too, so I don't remember. I'd have to take another look at it. But yeah, this guy just so far has not made any good points beyond fake perspective looks weird.
Knight is an incredible game, and spoiler alert, it don't got no slopes in it.
It got no slope. Literally looking at a slope right here. Are you saying that the hitbox is a rectangle there? Is that what that is? The hitbox is a rectangle? I mean, Hollow Knight does have like a high speed move, so like a speed booster, right? That would really benefit from slopes. And also, again, the obnoxious laugh. I'm lucky I don't play drinking games, because imagine drinking every time this guy laughs. There are slopes everywhere. I'm gonna just take a look at some levels. Like, I'm looking on Google Images now, looking to see if I can find any examples of slopes. Honestly, I'm actually not seeing slopes. But like, okay, Hollow Knight's got the high speed move, right? Let's go to art here. Alright, so you got your high speed move. You're zooming along, rolling around at the speed of sound. Now there's a change in elevation, right? But what if, remember the idea of being able to do a high jump by ramping? What if you mix that with your high speed? You go here, you jump, and you just like, vroom, like this, right? What if you could do something like that? Maybe it should have had slopes. Or like, what about like Metroid? Where like you got the speed booster, and then it goes up a slope like this, and then you've got another platform over here. So when you go up here, charge a shine spark, and then you go up this slope here, and the slope is what allows you to regain control after using a shine spark. You need to step on the slope to get your feet back on the ground. It has slopes in every room. I'm literally looking at screenshots of the game. I don't see slopes. Like, I would play the game myself, but honestly, the game just looks kind of creepy for me. Slopes are subtle? Okay. I'm gonna take your word for it, because the game honestly looks a bit too creepy for me to play. Like, the weird ghosty bugs, it's like Tim Burton bugs. It's like mixing things that I just, no. No, thank you. But yeah, like, this is the type of challenge here. Look at any of the speed booster puzzles in Metroid. They all require slopes to be possible, because if you didn't have slopes, if you just had like this and then a straight up, and you speed boost and then you shine spark, you're just gonna go up, and you're gonna hit the ceiling and lose your speed, and it would suck. The slopes add possibility, and it's possibility that this guy isn't even considering. Stop laughing.
So that's what I'm saying. If you really love slopes, or you have a use case that makes slopes important, you have some main mechanic of your game that you need to slide down slopes or slide up slopes or something.
Again, he's answering himself. If you've got mechanics that take advantage of slopes. Dude, my guy. What have I been telling you to do this whole time? Make a mechanic that uses slopes. All it would take to justify slopes is literally just one thing for your character or your enemies to do. Don't confine yourself to your own idea. Explore new... That is absolute W take right there. Flutter, you're amazing. I want to pin that. We're pinning that to chat. That's perfect. We're pinning that. I want that here until the end of this. Best advice all stream. Don't confine yourself to your own ideas. But dude, that's brilliant advice that every developer needs to hear. Like, everyone is like, I want to do this one thing, but if that thing isn't working out, don't keep forcing yourself to stick with it. You gotta explore other possibilities and see what else can be done, and like, ask yourself, would incorporating this other possibility make my game better? Am I going about this the wrong way? Every dev needs to ask themselves that.
Slopes are a core part of your game, or you just really don't care about all the extra work, you love them that much, sure, go ahead, put slopes in your game. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not your dad. I couldn't stop you if I wanted to. But if you don't have a strong feeling about slopes, or they aren't necessary, they aren't like a core necessity for your gameplay, cut them. And
no, like, they don't have to be core to be worth keeping. Like, hey, you know what? Mini games are generally not part of the core gameplay loop, especially for like a platformer or an RPG, right? They're not core to it, but a lot of games include them anyway, because variety is the spice of life. Why would you cut something that adds flavor? That's like saying, don't add sauce to a hamburger. It doesn't add much value to it. Sure, it might just make the burger delicious, but you don't need to worry about the whole process of making sauce just to put on your burger and make it actually taste like something. This dude is literally telling everyone, don't put toppings on your sandwich. If it's more than just meat in a bun, it's too much. Cut it. I don't actually like burgers.
Coming from me, that's like really hard to say, because boy, I love slopes. I have thought,
you don't sound like you love slopes.
Never doing it so many times while working on this game. But ultimately, the answer, I think, is just that they're not worth it. And
I just, if you love, like, that's defeating himself right there too. If you love the mechanic and you're willing to make it work, why not just put it in? If you're an indie dev, the game is an expression of who you are. If you love slopes, put them in. Be too demotivated to write rendering. I mean, imagine, I'd have less to talk about for sure, but imagine how many devs would be better off if this guy was too demotivated to make this video. Imagine how many devs would be better off if they never looked at this guy with his game that he successfully got up on Steam and think because of that he knows what he's doing, so he must be worth listening to, and we should take his lesson to heart. How many of them are now worse off for having heard this advice? How many devs are going to make boring, flat levels or rigid, blocky levels that are just so ugly because of this guy's advice? Because they didn't want to take the time to put in something as simple as a slope. Who knows? Maybe my game can combine the FOSS and esports community. Hey, dude, if you can get your game into an actual esport, because I mean, you're basically making Melee, right? But FOSS. I could see it happening. I can honestly see it happening. I mean, it's like Rivals of Aether didn't need the star power of Super Smash Bros. To become an esport. Even Multiverses, which a lot of people look at like a joke, still has a presence in esports. I could totally see Tux Battle Melee working as an esport. I think you can do it. By the way, everyone watching this and everyone watching the VOD later, I'm going to put it in the description when I make a VOD of this. Well, it's not playable yet at the time of recording this. But go to FlutterTal's GitHub, star the project. He's making a Super Tux, Super Smash Brothers type game. And I totally want to see it. I want to see it succeed. So I'm going to be linking to that in the description. I want to see that get off the ground and become an esport. And guess what? It's going to have slopes. Just saying. It's going to have them slopes. I mean, heck. Like, let's go back to the artboard again. So you know how Middy's got that attack where he can spin an acorn on the ground like a top, and it goes along the ground like that, right? Let's say we're going to have no slopes. This change in elevation. So you got the acorn bomb going along, falls down, continues going, right? This is now a safe area where you can just hide from the bomb. Talk about invalidating a challenge. Here, removing the slope invalidates the challenge. Because if you got the slope here, now you're in the path of the bomb. If you've got, same with like an enemy that moves fast, they would just overshoot you. What would make it more challenging to avoid them? A slope. There you go, dude. Your whole talk about slopes invalidating challenges, I just made a challenge that's invalidated by removing the slope. What do you think of that? What do you think of that, dude?
With that, we've reached the end of the video. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment telling me how awesome this video was and how I've completely blown your mind about.
I'll tell you how awesome it was. It was so awesome that I had to make a response ragging on it. Yeah, finally. It's finally over. The end of the video. It's the best part. And now we come to the best part of the video. The end.
How slopes work.
Oh my god, he's still laughing at himself. Why? This has been a thing. This has blown your mind. What blows my mind is how this guy can be so oblivious to the possibilities of slopes. Either that, or purposefully ignoring them because he's trying to play prosecutor against them. Which, I mean, if that was the case, if he was trying to say, I'm trying to build a case, and be honest about that, I'd at least have some respect for him. I wouldn't agree with anything he said in this, but I would at least understand that he's basically playing devil's advocate here. But he's made no indication of that. So I can only assume that he genuinely believes everything he's said so far. And that makes me sad that this guy, who now has some street cred because he's selling his game on Steam, so people are going to listen to him, that he's giving people this absolutely awful advice. I feel sad. I feel sad that other devs are going to see this. People trying to learn game development, and they're coming to him to try to learn. And now their games are going to have ugly level design because they thought, oh, slopes must be this bad thing that I should never ever use. This guy is a Jaffe. That's all I can say about him is he's being a Jaffe right now.
Yeah, I'm supposed. What am I supposed to say? Like, subscribing is free. That's one of the things I'm supposed to say. I'm supposed to say only one person that out of every bajillion that watches.
Okay, this is unrelated, but what is it with YouTube telling people to rag on them about how many viewers they have that are unsubscribed? Like, what? Who cares? Most of the videos I watch come from channels that I'm not subscribed to because YouTube shows them to me in recommendations anyway. There are channels that I watch religiously that I am not subscribed to because they just come up in the feed. I mean, I guess it's because like monetization has something to do with subscribers. Hey, anyone watching this when it comes out on YouTube, I don't give a crap if you're unsubscribed. Like, you subscribe if you want to be notified. That's it. But if you're getting me through your recommended feed, cool. That's great. Awesome. It just means I'm doing something right because I'm getting recommended. But I can't believe that this guy, who apparently loves slopes so much, has managed to get so tilted by them.